Down now? All right, so we'll start all over, except that we're not going to bother wasting time on the intro music that Don went to all the trouble to send out. So, hello, everybody. How you doing, Don?
It's good to be
Welcome
here.
to the Atheist Experience Live, guerrilla TV style from Dillahunty International Studios. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me is Don Baker. We're a live show, and I'm going to run through this as quick as I can. That's normally done in public access, but we're doing it from here because the public access studios are being renovated. We still take live calls or actually make them, but we do it differently. If you go to Skype, skype.com, and download the software, set up an account, it's all free. It is basically a voice over IP thing. First, you're going to need to make sure you have a microphone. Second, you're probably going to want to make sure you have headphones. It's much nicer. You don't have to worry about the feedback. You don't have to let Skype adjust all your levels. Just slap your headphones on, grab your mic, and then add to your contact list Atheist TV. That's ATHEIST TV, no spaces. And on the days when the show's live, if you just send a text message over Skype to that contact with your name, your location, and what you want to talk about, we'll add you to the queue. If you're watching live, we apologize for the audio problem. We just forgot to plug something in. We had no idea. And that's what happens when you do live TV. If you're going to try and call in today, wow, there's probably already a dozen people ahead of you right now, but feel free to do so, particularly if you're, not an atheist. And if you have some area where you disagree or some particular view where you think you're right and we're wrong and you'd like to explain what you believe and why, that is of utmost interest to me anyway. The purpose of the show, it serves so many purposes. We are here for everybody. In reality, though, we're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center. You can find out more about the ACA, including a list of events and a calendar with a schedule of events, at www.atheist-community.org. The next big event, of course, is the Bat Cruise coming up. This is 26th.
Yes.
September 26th, Saturday. You can find more information at the website. Today was a lecture instead of the first Sunday because the first Sunday was Labor Day weekend. And we had Kathy, is it Miller?
Miller, yes.
Miller, from the Texas Freedom Network. I cannot begin to express how important it is. I don't care if you live in Texas or not. Maybe if you live outside the United States, it's not quite as important. But if you live in the United States, you need to go and thank the Texas Freedom Network, and if at all possible, offer your support in some way, not necessarily monetarily, but in some way, because as was mentioned today, the types of school books that we get in Texas affect the types of school books that kids around the country get. Texas is the largest single adoption, by the way, the state adopts textbooks for the entire state. Out of all the states, we're the biggest.
But a lot of states follow suit. They just use Texas as textbooks. So the State Board of Education in Texas has a disproportionate influence over education throughout the United States.
So when the batshit crazy extremists,
of which there are many.
Yeah, there's 15 members on the State Board of Education. I'd guess 7 of them probably fit that criteria. Mm-hmm. When they go about invoking their policies and approving books, we had fight after fight. We've had fights on evolution. We've had fights on health and human reproduction. Now we're currently in a battle over social studies, where they've brought in the guys from the Wall Builders. This whole
fake historians.
Yeah, they're what they're doing is they're bringing in people to revise history, to present history to future generations of students in such a way that they are convinced by their school books that this is a Christian nation founded on Christian principles. But that's not the end of it. They're also going after the amount of impact or the amount of time spent on minorities and people who they don't think were significant contributors to history. The examples, of course, today were Thurgood Marshall and Cesar Chavez.
Meanwhile, they're trying to promote Phyllis Schlafly and
Rush
Rush
Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh does not need to be in our frickin' history books. Are you kidding me?
Anyway, it's a circus.
So they pull in the guys from the Wall Builders, who are the biggest quote mining liars I think I've ever run across. You go looking for quotes from the founding fathers that seem to support their view. Odds are David Barton, I believe,
yes, has made it up.
Has either invented it out of whole cloth or cleverly quote mined it. As a matter of fact, there was one quote recently somebody said, and when challenged on it, this isn't Barton, it's somebody else, but when challenged on it, the person basically said, well, that may not have been what he said, but that's what he meant.
Oh, geez.
Oh, boy. I didn't know you could talk to the
well,
dead.
If you can spin the Bible with your interpretation, why not spin people's quotes?
So that's what's going on, and that's why Texas is so important. It's a big state with big impact, and the way that the school board is set up is critical, not only to students in Texas, but to students around the country. And here we are. We get a lot of information or a lot of feedback saying, "Boy, you guys are atheists in Texas. That must be hard." Well, not really. Not in Austin. I mean, Austin is a fairly, liberal, hippie-esque town. So it's not like we're out here dodging bullets every day.
High tech, and educated, and
But while we're not necessarily extremely brave in that sense, it's very important that I think you're going to find that the most vocal proponents of reason and the most vocal critics of religious absurdity, of violations of church-state separation, are going to come from areas like Texas, and which is why Texas Freedom Network is an organization. There is no other. There's no comparable organization anywhere else in the country, as far as I can tell. So that's what's going on. You can visit our website, and there's more information. You can stop by Texas Freedom Network as well, and just Google it. Google will send you right there.
It's tfn.org.
Yeah.
It's real easy.
And that's most of what's going on. There's additional visitors showing up. I don't even have all the information.
For the Bat Cruise?
Yeah, well, no, Seth's going to be here. Is it Seth? I think.
I don't
Maybe
know.
Shane. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to screw it up. We already wasted time. I'm going to let Don get to his stuff. We got callers waiting. Don's got some stuff to talk about, and we'll get to as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Oh.
So you're tuning out? Oh, the
Still a spoon.
Still a spoon.
Still a spoon.
Hasn't magically turned into a fork or anything, huh?
It's not even particularly bendy.
Okay. Well, today I wanted to talk about, continue on in the theme of the greatest hits. This time I'm stepping off of the Bible a little bit and kind of talking about greatest hits of religion, if you will. And one of the things that seems to happen is the title of the show is Spinning Suffering. So we're going to talk about suffering today. And there's a lot of conflicting and bizarre religious messages and meaning associated with suffering. So let's start out with maybe what the atheist view of suffering is. In my view, and I think that of many atheists, is that suffering has no intrinsic meaning, that it's just a thing, except perhaps physical pain that might be your body communicating to you that, hey, something's wrong, quit hitting your thumb with a hammer, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But most suffering is senseless and often produces no benefit. That said, suffering can drive home lessons, so it can be a way to draw your attention to things that may have happened that were bad. It may force you or encourage you to increase your knowledge or change your behavior. And it has been the source of many inventions. You see people suffering doing various things like the cotton gin, for example. People were picking seeds out of cotton, and Eli Whitney figured out, hey, we can make a little machine to do this, and saves a lot of time and these sorts of things, and that's good.
I think it may be worthwhile to distinguish between suffering in the general sense and
sacrifice.
What you would identify as probably senseless or needless, unnecessary suffering.
Okay. Well, yeah, and I think the goal here is to reduce the needless suffering, right? And that would be kind of a moral thing, right? I think that's kind of a foundational aspect of our morality. We have empathy. We kind of suffer when someone else suffers, and we're aware of that. And so we want to stop that, and that's part of our evolutionary history.
Not me. I'm evil. I have fun when somebody else suffers.
Okay.
Not really.
And this is different than sacrificing for a goal, because then you're making a trade, right? You're going to say, I'm going to forego smoking, or I'm going to forego going out and playing, and I'll study instead, and I'll have a bigger benefit down the road. But the religious view of this is rather interesting. We get kind of this almost like a God of the gaps idea. We have this senseless suffering, and what they do is they say, "Oh, well, here's a gap that we can fill. Let's interpret it. Let's give it meaning, and let's give it a religious meaning, and let's give it a meaning that benefits the religion or benefits the God." And so that's what you happen to see here. So that's why you end up with sort of spin. So, for example, here's from a Baha'i website. Why do we suffer? Suffering comes for us for two reasons. Either it's a consequence of our own actions, or is a test set up by God for our spiritual development. So here we're starting to get the spin where God is attributed to the meaning of perhaps senseless suffering. And
basically there's two types of suffering. Suffering you understand why it happens, and suffering you don't. And on the ones you don't, they're going to stick a God in there.
Okay. Here's another one from the same website. Grief and sorrow do not come to us by chance. They are sent by the divine mercy for our own perfecting. So suffering is sort of good as far as religion is concerned. And so you get this sort of heads we win, tails you lose sort of interpretation of suffering. That so suffering is good and just if it happens to be martyrs and nuns and torture of heretics and the pain of childbirth. But suffering is bad if yeah.
But somebody needs to put a note on this episode and mark the time, because for all of the comments that we get about how we only focus on a particular religion or one or two, not only did we cite an example from Baha'i, but I'll go on record as saying that is just as moronic, metaphysical, frou-frou fucking nonsense as you're going to find from anybody else.
Yeah.
Period.
In fact, I was shocked to find it was a Baha'i website, because it sounds very much like the Christian message. It's almost you can find the same sorts of things in Christian.
And by the way, when atheists propose things like this, for example, I've had, I won't go into detail on that, but it's still stupid, meaningless drivel. It is some kind of I can't even come up with the right word for it. So keep going.
Okay.
I'll come up with a word later. I'll make up a word if I have to.
One of the things with spin is you get sort of conflicting messages. You get things interpreted one way in one situation, another way in another situation, right? And that's how you know there's spin. Is it's not a consistent interpretation. So from a religious standpoint, suffering is good if it's martyrs and if it's Jesus or if it's nuns that are making sacrifices or torture of heretics. That's all good. And but suffering is bad if it's Christians who can't get their Bibles and to go do worship. Those people are persecuted. And suffering is important if it's potential babies being killed by abortion doctors and all this, or if it's suffering on the cross. But suffering is unimportant if you're supposed to forgive your people that trespass against you, or in the case of an adult victim of pedophilia who is still struggling with his being molested as a child. He was told, Jesus died for your sins. You think you could handle this? So it's kind of denigrating his
Wow.
suffering. Yeah. Here in Texas, we actually had a priest prick the hand of the hand of a child with a pin to get them to empathize with Jesus' suffering. And when you teach the flood seems to be taught as a story of let's watch the little furry animals go on a little boat ride, when in reality it's the global genocide and killing of all sorts of people.
Yeah, it's also the establishment in all of these cases where basically there's something that we don't really understand or we don't have a good explanation for, so anybody can make up whatever nonsense they want. But they also, in many cases, set up a win-win or a no-lose situation. For example, if I come down with an illness as a godless reprobate heathen, there are some religious people who would say that this is God punishing me for my apostasy.
Oh, you see that with the AIDS thing all the time.
And And
Engaged
if
in reserves.
something good happens to me, then that is my Lord Satan rewarding me. Now, this is tuned to me because of what I do or don't believe. If the exact opposite were to happen, if, for example, they were to come down with an illness, this is perhaps God allowing Satan to test them, or it is their own fault. And if some windfall should happen to occur for them, this is God blessing them for their service. So the same thing happens to two different people, but because they don't agree on whether or not there's a magic guy handing out rewards and sticks, they just make it up. It's just, this is good. Good things have happened to me because I am righteous. And okay, well, good things have happened to me too. Yes, but you're being rewarded for being evil. Wow.
Or you cheated.
How
you cheated
clever.
God somehow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're able
I'm
to
way
do that.
smarter than your God.
So some religions have gotten, I think, very attached to this idea of interpreting suffering, so much so that they actually serve to sabotage our natural aversion to suffering, and maybe even advocated and create suffering in some cases. And I think the Catholic Church is especially big on that, in the sense that they really kind of value suffering quite a bit and go a little overboard with it. Well, today I have actually 4 examples I want to go through. I don't know how much time we're going to have, but the first one is William Lane Craig had an interesting response on the slaughter of the Canaanites, and this kind of gets back into the biblical thing as well. And his answer is just jaw-droppingly interesting. We can talk about Mother Teresa. Something that I came up with about no empathy in heaven, and finally attitudes towards torture. And all of these seem to have the same sort of thing. They're spinning whatever interpretation of suffering to advance their religion, and at the same time maybe sabotaging the real moral instincts that you would have in the particular situation.
Yeah, they've been polluted. Your evolved sense of empathy, of projection, of being able to assess situations, it's been polluted by these religious dogmatic ideas. It's and by the way, I hate to sidetrack again.
That's fine.
Just as a quick note, Norman Borlaug died.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And for those who don't know, he may well be one of the greatest human beings who ever lived. And
unsung heroes. Actually, he was sung about.
Yeah, he was a little sung and getting more sung. Basically, his ideas for creating new types of wheat saved billions of lives.
He's credited with feeding 1 billion people,
and continues to, it's shocking. But I'm not overly sad. He led a long life, an incredibly productive life, where he's got people on all sides of all kinds of issues basically saying this guy may be one of the greatest people who ever lived. Certainly his particular accomplishments and his selflessness in trying to help other people is something to be lauded. And I'll flatly say that I don't care what his religious beliefs are, Norman Borlaug is more moral than any character in the Bible. And he was probably a better person than anybody else I know. But he has died.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I spent a long time trying to find out his religious beliefs, and I think he's just kept them to himself.
Good for him.
Yeah. So anyway, so on this William Lane Craig piece, now who is William Lane Craig? Maybe you can tell the audience, because you're more familiar with him than I am.
He's a
well-known apologist.
Theologian, apologist. I know he taught at seminaries for a number of years. I know John Loftus actually studied with him. Basically, he's just a famous apologist, and of the Christian quote-unquote thinkers, he's very highly regarded within the community, like Plantinga or Ravi Zacharias, and yet largely unimpressive to those outside of that community.
Okay, prepare to be unimpressed.
I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. I'm not saying the guy is stupid or anything else. I'm just saying that there's something about religion in general and Christianity in particular that when intelligent people begin to delve into apologetics to defend their faith, they are exceptionally good at coming up with rationalizations to support their beliefs. They're so good at spinning these that the uninitiated look at them as if they have, they've cracked the problem of evil, or they've cracked the ontological argument, or whatever, and ha ha ha, aren't those atheists foolish? And I don't know why it isn't addressed more often, that they are engaged in some rather dishonest argument where they're smuggling in hidden premises. I just had a long conversation with a guy about this last night, or an email trade. But anyway, enough about that.
Okay. Well, a fan of our show sent this in. It's an article from Reasonable Faith where he's answering viewer or questions from people on the internet. It's kind of a blog. And the subject is the slaughter of the Canaanites, and that goes back to Deuteronomy 7, verse 1 through 2. And if you want to read here, or are you going to look it up?
I'm fast.
He's fast. He knows his Bible. Watch out. Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 2.
Yeah, 7, 1, 2. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land where thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy upon them. So basically, it's an order from God to his favorite tribe to go slaughter everybody that's in their way with no mercy.
Right. Kill every living thing.
Take them out, take their stuff.
And so some people wrote William Lane Craig saying, hey, this sure does look immoral to me and all this. So William Lane Craig actually has a kind of jaw-dropping response. First, he argues that objective morals exist, therefore God exists, but that God is not subject to objective morals, and that God's command is what is moral.
He is above the law. He is Steven Seagal.
So this is like one non sequitur after another. So, yeah, objective morals exist, therefore God exists, and then God's somehow completely irrelevant to that. God is
the parent who makes a bunch of rules, and when questioned about them, the answers are because I said so. And when asked why they don't follow the rules, the answer is because they don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm the boss. I brought you into this world. I can take you out.
Right.
And now, I'm half joking.
But, no. But it hits it dead on, man.
It's an amusing thing. But ask yourself, seriously, I don't care, whether you're a theist, atheist, deist, pantheist, whatever. This is what Craig is saying. He's not alone. This is common. Hell, this is the stuff that I used to accept. But ask yourself if this is remotely satisfying to you. Is this something that you think is moral and just? I made the rules. I don't have to abide by them. You do. And they don't exist for any particular reason. They exist because I said so. No jam on Thursdays.
Well, it's might make right.
Yeah.
Might makes right. So, so William Lane Craig argues that God has no moral duties to fulfill.
Yep.
And therefore there's no objective morality, right? Because it doesn't apply to God.
Which, of course, means that all of those promises that Christians are holding to, that they're convinced that God will actually take care of because it's in his character, he could, right now, if he so chose, say, they're all null and void, screw you guys, all you good little sheep who thought you were getting to heaven, I changed my mind. Now it's only blonde-haired, blue-eyed people who get to heaven.
And you should kill everybody else.
Yeah, kill the rest of them.
Right.
See Kyle.
Then he goes off and says, let's blame the victims. They were worshiping other gods. He goes to say, by the time of their destruction, Canaanite culture was in fact debauched and cruel, embracing such practices as ritual prostitution and even child sacrifice.
So if God told William Lane Craig to go around killing the Jew, well, maybe not the Jews, but if he told him to go kill the Muslims and the Hindus and the atheists and the Buddhists and whoever else, then Craig would have to do it and have to think that it's entirely moral. I mean, God's telling him to do that.
Well, one question I have is, doesn't God practice child sacrifice?
Well, who's he going to? No.
Didn't he sacrifice his son, supposedly?
Well, that's him.
That's him. Oh, he's okay.
There's so much. You can't even really call it a weirdly pseudo-incestuous relationship. There's something else going on there when you sacrifice yourself to yourself as a loophole for rules that you created.
Yeah, it's all mind-boggling.
What kind of fascination with blood do you have to have where that's your best plan? And everything, I created everybody on the planet. I'm just going to start with 2, and they screwed up. So, all right, I said I was going to kill him. Let's not kill him. We'll kick him out of the garden, and we'll keep on going. And then, wow, things aren't getting better. They're getting worse. Now they're murdering each other. And okay, screw it. I'm going to flood this place and save just the best family. Which one of you fuckers is that? Oh, you, the sorry drunk with 3 sons. Go and build yourself a boat, and we'll save you and your family and screw everybody else. So we flood everything and start over. Hit God's reboot number 2, and then okay, now that's over with, I want you guys to go and populate the earth again like the first group. Oh no, don't curse one of your sons to be a fucking slave to all the rest of it. What are you thinking? All right, and then a little while later, some of them have built this tower, and this God says, they think they're building a tower. Well, maybe they don't actually think they can reach me. It's just arrogant of them. Screw it. Let's confuse all their languages, and none of this works. And then, oh, wait a minute. Instead of trying to have the whole world worship me, I'm just going to pick my favorite tribe. And, hey, you guys are mine. And here's a whole bunch of promise. Hey, you got enslaved? Actually, they didn't, but all right, then I'll do a whole bunch of miracles and lead you guys out. And then, oh, by the way, you, the guy that I helped here, come to the top of the mountain. I want to talk to you for a minute. And here's some rules I think would probably be pretty good. Are they worshiping another god already?
Molten god. Oh, no.
Oh, what is wrong with it? Why can't I do anything right, Mom? And now, after all of this, it's like, I know what I'll do.
Yeah, you're just.
I love blood sacrifices. Yeah, I love blood sacrifices. I'll just kill myself to myself. Word.
That'll get their attention.
The Bible is a comedy of failures of this God character, start to finish, right up to the end where everybody dies. Well, only there's a new heaven, new earth. Anyway, go back. I'm sorry.
I don't know how much of a comedy that is.
Sorry to. Head off in a different direction.
So then William Lane Craig goes on to address the children, the fact that this order is to go kill children too, and he goes to say, well, God knew if those Canaanite children were allowed to live, they would spill the undoing of Israel. So just these little babies are gonna are more powerful than God, and got to kill them. So that was pretty amusing. Then he goes on to say, oh, there weren't any real victims. So first off, he's blaming the victims, and then they're saying, oh, well, they weren't really victims, right? They weren't really victims. He goes on to say, well, so whom does God wrong in commanding the destruction of the Canaanites? Not the Canaanite adults, for they were corrupt and deserving of judgment. Not the children, for they inherit eternal life. So who is wronged? Ironically, the most difficult part of this whole debate is the apparent wrong done to the Israeli soldiers themselves. Can you imagine what it would be like to have to break into someone's house and kill a terrified woman and her children? The brutalizing effect on these Israeli soldiers is disturbing.
No, Mr. Craig. What is disturbing is how badly your brain has been poisoned that you're now apologizing. My gosh.
He goes on to say that no one was wringing his hands over the soldiers having to kill the Canaanites. Those who did so were national heroes. So killing children is national hero. You're a national hero if you go kill somebody else's children. Now you can contrast that with the current abortion movement, where anyway, it's just mind-boggling. So that's a good example of sort of twisted morality for you, right?
Just think how hard it must have been for those Nazis to have had to go in and kill those Jews. That's what you're doing.
That's right.
Just think how bad it was for those slave owners who had to beat those slaves that didn't do what they was told. You complete frickin' asshat. You have no decency. And this isn't, when we're talking about Craig, this isn't some buffoon who goes on the internet to, make himself popular arguing with atheists. This is one of the pinnacles of Christian apologetics. And you wonder, people email, it's like, haven't you ever heard anything, good from any apologists? Yeah, sure. I mean, some of these guys are relatively smart, and some of them are very smart, and they come up with some good arguments, but they don't actually come up with good arguments in favor of what they're saying, and they don't provide evidence to support what they're saying. It's just that, if somebody launches a particular objection against Christianity, for example, and it's a bad one, they can spot the flaws in it, but they're unable to spot the flaws in their own. And now they are saying they're bending over backwards and sacrificing every bit of decency they have in order to make excuses for this fictional monster that they feel they must defend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm really grateful to that fan of ours for sending that in.
And people wonder why I get so spun up about this. If you're not offended, if your sensibilities aren't offended by stupid stuff like that, you're also hopeless. Oh, those crazy Christians, they're just so silly. Look at this stupid stuff. No, this stuff does harm, because once you have a mindset that accepts that this is right and this is wrong, and you can make excuses for stuff like this, that is part of who you are, and it's part of other decisions you make, and it's how we end up with so many of the problems that we have.
Well, it's like our nation going to the Iraq to kill these folks. It's like somehow it's our mandate to go and be the police of the world, or fulfill God's word, or whatever reason we went to Iraq to go kill people. And it's the same thing over again, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the amount of people that the U.S. has killed, it's like 600,000 or 800,000 people that we've killed, but we only cry about the deaths of the Americans, right? Very few Americans give a shit about the Iraqi deaths.
Yeah.
And it's all very much part of this mindset, I think, of, we're the good guys, screw everybody else, and God is on our side.
Yeah, and by the way, for those of people who got upset because it's extremely rude of me to reach down and grab my iced tea and have a drink while the show's on the air, evidently that's the case. We're doing this show in my living room. You're lucky I got pants on.
Oh, one more irony about that William Lane Craig piece is the whole Canaanite thing. We talked about this last time I was on. The Curse of Canaan, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Is really the whole the Israelites were in that land, and so they ended up spinning all these legends so that they could sort of justifiably in their mind take over this land. And so you have God giving them this land, and God making Canaanite slaves, and God and the idea of killing the Canaanites and all this. And so the irony is that Yahweh had subsumed a lot of the Canaanite gods, or the Canaanite gods became part of Yahweh. Is that it's cause and effect is a little hard to say, but El and Baal were actually subsumed into the Yahweh. So in many ways, it's like the Christians today beating up on the Jews. It's the same religion. And so history is written by the winners. You go and say, oh, well, we got to beat up on these evil people. Well, that's usually what the winners end up saying, right? But it's like a sibling rivalry. These are two sides of the same coin, and so one side's then giving you this version where they won because they were killing the bad guys who happened to be just like them.
Yeah,
and worship the same gods.
You want one of my favorite examples of circular reasoning in discussing this type of thing. Once upon a time, I made the point that if, for example, the Israelites had managed to get their asses kicked more handily than they did on occasion, and they were wiped out by, for example, the Canaanites or whoever, then all of a sudden we wouldn't have Judaism and its follow-on religions. We'd have, the religions of Baal or El or whatever, and the world would be a completely different place. And the guy, I kid you not, looked at me and goes, well, that's how you know God's real, because they won. They had the right God. Sweet. So when I smack you for being stupid, it proves that my God's more powerful than your God, right?
Yeah. So whatever rationalization. Let me move on. One of my favorite quotes is from a minister. I'm not even sure what persuasion he is. He's Reverend Nathaniel Emmons, and he lived from 1745 to 1840. And he says, the happiness of the elect will consist in part of witnessing the torments of the damned in hell, among whom may be their own children, parents, husbands, wives, and friends. But instead of taking part in their miserable being, they will say, Amen, hallelujah, praise the Lord. So I think that Emmons was really pretty far ahead of his time. I think that this attitude of you're going to be in heaven watching and enjoying the torments of everybody else in hell was actually pretty prescient, right? It follows from three tenets, I think, that God is just, that everybody got sorted out into the right place, so that's the first tenet. The second one is you'll have direct knowledge of people suffering in hell. Right? And if you're in heaven, you're not going to have knowledge withheld from you. You'll be like the gods. You'll know that they're down there. You'll get to watch all of it. So I think that follows from a lot of Christian theology. And you'll be blissfully happy. You'll be in perpetual orgasm land in heaven, and you'll be watching this, and gosh, it'll be great. So it seems like heaven is really sort of appeals to the sadist.
And to be contrary, because I'm often contrary.
Please be contrary
when Don's here. This is an old idea that doesn't really hold much sway now, and as far as I can tell, there's no biblical justification for the idea that you will be completely knowledgeable or able to observe the suffering of people in hell.
Okay, so God will. I disagree.
Okay.
If
what Bible passage
well,
supports
I'm not
it?
saying that. I'm just saying, are people really believing that they're going to go off into some fantasy land? That they'll be have a reality there that is anything less than the complete reality?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going away, in most versions of Christianity, you are made new. You spend an eternity in God's presence, and the argument is that the awareness of suffering would be something that you would not be able to have access to in heaven, because that would diminish the value in heaven, or the purity.
It sounds like they've struggled with this sort of.
Well, what they struggle with off and on is somebody comes up with an idea and it gains some popularity, because we'd all like to see people get what's coming to them. And then somebody like you points out the absurdity of this as an attack against the particular beliefs. And then some people like Craig come along and say, it's not in the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that leads you to this conclusion. And so that's why I generally avoid those, because it looks like, I could, there's a guy who emailed us this week. Mm-hmm. Nuts, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, just completely. And I could, if I wanted to, grab that email and say, here's what we got. Look, aren't these Christians wacky? Isn't this guy nut? But it's not a representation of what people actually believe. And in the case of the Emmons quote, I'm sure that there are probably some people who think that they're going to actually, when I talk to most Christians and ask them, for example, I'd spoken to my parents at some point and didn't get a satisfactory answer. But there is this idea that when you're in heaven and you know that I'm in hell because I'm not there, if for no other reason you know that I'm not there, wouldn't that make you sad? And the answer, of course, is
baby food version of this, right?
And the answer, of course, is no. I would be incapable of sadness. And this gets right back to who the hell are you when you're in heaven? If you are incapable of X, Y, and Z that you used to be capable of, you're not the same person.
Right. If there's no empathy in heaven, Why would anyone go there?
But none of them think that they're going to be sitting around watching the people in hell get their comeuppance and going, "Ooh, isn't that? Oh, look, you got a pitchfork right up there."
Okay, let me follow on now. What about this rapture idea, where you get swept up to heaven and you get to watch Jesus, decimate everybody who's non-believer and send them to lakes of fire and all this good stuff? I think it appeals to the very same idea of looking down and enjoying that torture. And
I don't, because there's a difference between feeling good that justice was served and taking pleasure in the suffering of others. Those are two different things. They're distinctly different. It's like, for example, and this is one that could probably ring true for a lot of people. I have no idea what your position is on capital punishment. Mine is that I am not opposed to capital punishment in principle. However, I can't find a satisfactory application of it, so I am therefore forced to be opposed to this in practice, because we don't have the degree of certainty and convictions that I would like in order to justify it. If I absolutely knew with no doubt that this guy, raped and murdered and butchered 5 little girls or whatever, kill him. No sweat off my back. I do not hold to the position that some others do. Now, that said, I think killing him would be just. That's just my opinion. I would be satisfied that justice had been served, but that doesn't mean that I want to watch the guy get butchered. There's a difference.
Okay.
But this is not something. I don't want to make it sound like Don just picked out the thing that. No. This used to be a very popular idea that was preached in a lot of places, and there are some people who probably still hold this.
Okay.
The asshole who's been praying for Obama to die type thing. He's probably the type of guy who likes that.
Okay.
The average person sitting in the pews, not really.
Let me do one more, and I'll try to make it short, and then we'll take calls. There was another interesting article. There was a survey done recently, and another survey done in 2006, and I have the 2006 version, concerning Americans' attitude towards torture. And it's broken down by religious belief. And it's very, very interesting, I think. So the question is, do you think that the use of torture against suspected terrorists in order to gain important information can be justified, often be justified, sometimes justified, rarely justified, or never be justified? And when you break it down by Catholic, white Protestant, white evangelical, and secular, the Catholics seem to think that it's often justified 21% of the time, and that it's never justified quite a bit less. And this is much higher than the total public. The seculars think that it's often justified 10% of the time and never justified 41% of the time. So this actually is an article in the National Catholic Reporter, which is kind of a pro-Catholic newsy magazine, and I just thought it was just fascinating that they had this, that the fact that Catholics and Christians in general have pretty positive attitudes towards torture, and I think that this is because there's torture in hell. God's torturing people, and the torture is just. It's absolutely just because God decided it. We have the Inquisition. We have people who went out and tortured other people to try to save them from hell, or extort money from them, or whatever exactly that they were doing. And I think we have a desensitization towards torture due to the marketing of Jesus and all the supposed sacrifice that Jesus went through, and things like the Passion of the Christ, the making of hamburger out of Jesus in order to drive home this point of this emotional thing. So anyway, I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay. Well, Joe, we're going to take a caller in a minute.
Okay. Did you have something to say?
But yeah, I'm gonna dissent again.
Okay, please do.
But not so much. I think you may be right in some sense that they're related like that. But I don't want to give the impression that that this is a kind of a thought process that goes from well, the Bible says that eventually people will be tortured, and that's just, and therefore it is just for us to torture, because that's not remotely the type of thing that would happen normally.
How do you mean normally?
In the average Christian, that thought process never is never going to occur. First of all, there is within most varieties of Christianity the idea that just because God does something doesn't mean that it's okay for us to do. For example, you're prohibited from killing someone, but God can kill whoever he wants.
Oh, but we just talked about the William Lane Craig thing of, God commanded this, so therefore it was immoral.
There's a difference between God commanding something and you doing something and saying that it's okay because God did it. That's what I'm saying, is that the thought process that you kind of implied
Okay.
torture is okay because it's okay for God to do it is not the same thing.
But if you have a God that thinks torture is just hunky-dory.
But that's not the case of the Christian God.
Well,
that's not. It's not the case.
He's actively torturing people.
But that's.
I'm sorry.
That's
according to the mythology.
That's my point. That's why I'm making this. Is that you're saying that because he does it, he's hunky dory with it, and your implication is that because he does it, he's hunky dory with us doing it. And I'm saying that that's not necessarily the case.
I'm just saying it's a desensitization.
There is a grave distinction that is made clear in most versions of Christianity that is not the case, and I'd hate to see that misrepresented, that there are people running around saying God's just fine with torture, so let's get it on, because that's not the way it goes. There's a difference between God doing something, God ordering something done, and individuals doing something, and I think that the reason that distinction is kind of drilled home in the minds of many believers is because in the past there were people who did do the type of thing that you're doing.
Well, you don't have
maybe
to look
you've got
too
the
hard
Crusades
through the Bible to find
and the Inquisition
quotes where you seem to justify, God saying do this, do this, do this, and boy, that sure does relate to our current situation. And gosh, we need to go out and kill these people.
I agree. There are people who will take these things and use them in a certain way, and I already agreed that may be the case to some extent. But to think that first of all, the average person who's going to answer this poll, 80% of them are going to be believers because that's 80% of the population. Mm-hmm. And if the question is torture sometimes justified? By and large, it's not going to have the slightest thing to do with their religious beliefs or whether or not they think God justified. It's going to come down to their particular view of patriotism and what's okay to get things done. And while religion weighs in on that, and certainly has some things to say in those regards, I don't think that thought process is going the way you implied. But we don't know. There's more than one way to look at all of it, which is part of the problem.
Question. Certainly an interesting question.
It's a huge part of the problem.
Let's go to callers.
Who's up?
Waiting on.
Mike from Oxford, UK.
Mike in the UK, how are you?
Hi there, guys. Can you hear me? Hi, Don, Matt.
I can. I barely.
We're turning up the volume. Can you start again,
Sorry,
please?
guys. Hi, Don, Matt.
Yeah.
Hi.
Excellent. Hi. I tried to call a couple of weeks back. We were going to try and chat about epistemology.
I had about a week back.
Oh.
Sorry.
Ooh.
Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
me, guys?
please.
Sorry.
It's a bad pun. Please go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right. Sorry about that. Yeah, I called a couple of weeks ago, but missed off at the end of the show. Wanted to talk about epistemology with you.
Okay. A light subject.
Yes. There's a bit of a delay, so I'm going to pay no attention to the screen whatsoever. Yeah, I got into a debate with a Christian co-worker. Sorry, I should say straight up, actually, I'm not an atheist yet. Working on that, but
we're rooting for you.
Thanks, there. I appreciate the support. I get into a lot of these sort of debates on creationism versus evolution, on science and scientific method, but I kind of got caught off guard by the mention of epistemology about the theory of knowledge, and how from this Christian friend's point of view that science is arrogant to assume that it is the best form of epistemology. And I just wonder whether or not you guys had a standpoint on that to start with.
Sure.
Maybe just to spring off a couple of questions.
Sure. Real quick, they're a moron. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. if the assertion is that science is arrogant to presume that it is the best form of epistemology or the best application of this, if that's what they really said, then they're an idiot. Because science,
on what grounds?
I'm getting there. Science is a process that is being used. First of all, to imply that the process is arrogant is absurd. The idea that people might be arrogant in presuming that science is the best method.
Let's assume that's what he meant.
And that would be a fair assumption by and large. I'm not just nitpicking grammar in order to call him an idiot. There is, regardless of how reliable science is demonstrably the most consistently reliable path to truth ever. And science isn't this thing in a box that somebody discovered and left unchanged. The methods have modified specifically in concert with the information we've discovered in order to fix itself, so to speak. So we are now at a point where science, in its simplest terms, is simply the application of reasoning and critical thinking to evidence and observations. That's it. Now, if you had a claim that there was some other way of knowing, this comes up all the time, that there might be some other way of knowing. First of all, you'd need to demonstrate that there was another way of knowing, which to my knowledge nobody's ever done. What they've done is demonstrate that there are other ways of guessing. And then you'd need to demonstrate that this particular system of knowing, of acquiring an understanding about reality, is more consistently reliable than the scientific method that we currently use. And how exactly would you do that without using science? You would need this application, this logical application of reason.
Right? You'd put it in the horse race and see who wins, right? So you'd have to measure it somehow.
You'd be using science, the scientific method, to confirm that your other method is reliable. And guess what?
You'd be using evidence, not necessarily science. But go ahead.
No, you'd be using science. You'd be using logic and critical thinking.
This is the point, though, isn't it? If you found another method by which to actually prove this, you'd use that method. No? I'm not saying there is one. I'm just saying if there was a second method other than science to achieve this,
so if that other method
to achieve it?
Were revelation from God, then the revelation from God would say this revelation from God is the best method, therefore it wins, right?
I guess. I don't want it to, but yeah.
No, we'd have to have an objective way of deciding it, which is Matt's point.
Science. You'd have to demonstrate. Science is simply critical thinking, logical reasoning applied to evidence. Just presenting the evidence does nothing. You have to assess the evidence. And science is the shorthand label we put on the method that we use to best assess evidence. It is demonstrably the method that produces the most consistently reliable results. If there was a new method, a new way of knowing, you would have to test it this way to show that it's at least as reliable. And then you could get to the point where you could use perhaps this new method. But my thing is, what other method is there or could there be? We are in a position where what we're trying to do is gain some understanding about the reality that we experience. This necessarily involves observation. It necessarily involves independent confirmation from others that we are experiencing the reality with, presumably. And there must be some way, or we not must be some way, there needs to be a way, a method, to compare the information that we get from those sources. How else could you do it? What way could somebody possibly come up with to assess this that wouldn't qualify as science? And by the way, since science is self-correcting and adopting, if you were in fact to come up with something new, it would be folded in. So it's not...
Unless it were completely...
It's not...
Unless it violated these assumptions that you just said, right?
Unless it violated what?
Unless it violated the assumptions of testability and replicability and these sorts of things.
Well, if somebody found out that testability and replicability were not, in fact, the most reliable path to truth, that would be a monstrous discovery.
Yeah.
and
That
and
would
it
be
would
the only
be
way it wouldn't be folded into science, right?
well, science would change. What we call science is just the label
Matt,
for the
can you
best
then-
way. Yeah.
Can you see I'm just postulating here, but can you see then if I don't even want to consider it, but if somebody did come up with a fault in the demonstrable, the repeatable, then that could be the end of science as such. That then we would end up using a different form of epistemology.
I think we would try to repair it before casting it aside, right?
Well,
And this gets into the self-correcting thing, right?
Scotch tape for everything, yeah?
Well, we have made mistakes in science, and we have learned from those mistakes, and we have strived to to
That
not
was
make
fun.
those mistakes again.
the thing is that the type of hole that you're talking about is something, for example, in the foundations, and you're talking about a hole that could perhaps be identified in thought, in the foundational principles of thought, something like Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which casts a doubt on this. But the fundamental aspect of science is, does it consistently provide results, and particularly results that are useful and true? And I don't think that there would be any reason to chuck something out that, unless we found out that it wasn't actually providing results that were consistent with reality. If it, in fact,
figure out where the limitations were,
if it
and
in-
use it where it's appropriate, and not use it where it's not appropriate, right?
Right.
That's what we do.
But well, that's what I was getting to.
Sorry.
Can I extend
That's
this?
right, you
Because
beat me to
There
it.
were a couple of questions I wanted to
Sure.
ask off of the topic.
Sorry, Matt.
No, you beat me to it. You got there quicker than I would have. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I was thinking, you see, is religion. Does religion count as an epistemology, as a form of finding knowledge? I mean, not necessarily as good as science, but does it count as one on the scale?
It counts as a claim of a way of knowing.
So a claim of a source of knowledge, even if that source is faulty or false.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that at the time the Bible was being written, there were already scientific method scholars. There was scientific knowledge already available to the world, but not necessarily getting written down in the Bible. Therefore, what I'm trying to draw there is the people who were being taught by the religious leaders at the time may not have had the scientific method available to them as an epistemology. Does that mean that, for instance, that at that time they were relying on religion, not just out of ignorance, but out of the only available means by which maybe they could explain? I mean, this is your God of the gaps that you were saying earlier, Don.
Yeah.
I think,
Well, I think
they used this to fill the gaps because they didn't have a better means of filling the gaps.
Yeah,
It's not
both
they
things
used
are-
God to fill it, they just had nothing else to use.
Right. Both things are trying to answer the question of why things are the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and that God of the gaps is how it's working today. Is if science doesn't have an answer for X, the religion's right there ready to fill that gap and say, oh, God did it, or there's some religious explanation.
And I'll be the voice of dissent again. The answer to your question, the answer to your question is no, although it is no with a qualifier. In some senses, you have this big kind of argument from authority, and you have people making proclamations about how things work, and you may not have any good reason available to you to question this. However, you were saying that, as with regard to epistemology, this was the only way they had of knowing. No, that's not true. As a matter of fact, it's patently absurd. There's never been a time in human history when you've had the capability of thought that you didn't possess the capabilities of science. Now, I'm not, you're not going to be able to use a microscope or a telescope because those things aren't there. But science is just the application of reason and the evaluation of evidence. This has been true. It was true when they were writing the Bible. It was true when they were writing other holy books. It was true when anybody made claims about something. Just because that at a particular moment in time, an individual did not have the means to thoroughly investigate a claim, they still had the thinking ability to say, they might not, they didn't have formal thought and formal reasoning, logic. Aristotle suffers out the syllogistic forms. They didn't necessarily have that, but it's not like this stuff just appeared one day. The ability to think has always been there, and since the very first claims of like this, there have been people on the sidelines going, "I don't believe that." So,
Sure.
you know, they had.
I think they were trying to do the best they could with the resources they had. You know,
I mean, this is it. If the brightest and smartest of God's chosen tribe were actually saying these things and trying to lead the people to a better understanding of the way the world works, even if it was just stuff they made up on the weekend, it's still, you know, it's going to be difficult for the common guy to go, hang on a minute, no, I've thought this one through, and what you're saying sounds like tripe.
Yeah, and it's about, you know, like Don was saying they were doing the best they could with what they had. By and large, on that, I'm in agreement. The thing is that mistakes were made and not spotted, and this is the tradition. But when we take it back to what you were originally talking about with regard to epistemologies, ways of knowing, how do you know that what you quote know is so? There's never been a time that we've had a brain that we didn't have the ability, the capability to assess that type of thing. It's just not necessarily formalized, I guess would be a better way of putting it. Science is the culmination of the best and most reliable thought throughout all of history, getting rid of that which does not produce reliable results, keeping that which does. And those people who try to say that people are somehow arrogant for proclaiming science as the best, they're trying to smuggle something in. They're trying to falsely raise their particular claim to the level of science without doing the requisite work that would have something qualify as a science. You see it in intelligent design.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's probably everything I had right now about the epistemology thing. It was 2 weeks ago, so I don't really have fresh in my mind the ways that he used the argument.
Yeah.
He's a much better debater than I am, so I was on a back foot to start with. There is one last thing if I want to just grab before I move on, and that let you get to the next caller.
Sure.
I think last week on non-profits,
Yeah.
you may have picked up on one of my other questions, which was about quote mining the Bible.
Yeah.
Matt, I think it was you that actually spoke on that. When I actually made that question, I got to be honest, I sent that email kind of rushed, so I didn't go into references and stuff, and I don't have them here now either, which is bad. But I see a few websites where people are pulling, for instance, there's the tree which can see the four corners of the earth, which is used often to point out the Bible is a flat earth book. And I'm quoting that quote now without all the resources, so I guess I am quote mining myself. But isn't that quote, for instance, being taken out of context as it's coming from a dream which is filled with symbology rather than truth about the state of the earth?
Well, there was this notion of a firmament and these sorts of things that that may not lend itself to a flat Earth thing, but it was clearly wrong. It clearly wasn't a spherical Earth.
Determining which passages are meant to be poetic versus literal.
Yeah,
that's a huge problem. And the funny thing,
I agree totally. The literacy of any verse can be very difficult to pull. But in this particular instance, I wish I had Bible and verse for you. I don't. But there is a dream being described to Daniel as a prophet.
I know the passage.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And it is used as evidence that the Bible teaches that the earth is flat. Am I wrong in saying in this instance it is being quote mined because it is symbology from a dream?
I think there are other passages, aren't there?
Oh yeah, there are others. But what I'm saying is that there are instances where this is happening, and you were claiming in the non-profits episode that. In fact, you even went on further with another point, which I'll pick up on in a second. But you were claiming that I think that the quote mining happens more from the Christian point of view.
Yes.
Am I wrong in interpreting how you were saying that? I'm sorry.
No,
I don't want to get off topic.
That's exactly what I said.
Sure.
And I stand by it. The thing is, going back to how you determine whether or not a passage is literal or not. In some cases, it's obvious, and in other cases, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that just because something was in a dream, that it wasn't meant or understood to be literal. On the other hand, that may be an example of one of those passages that probably shouldn't be used for that purpose that it's being used for. I'm sure I've mentioned it on more than one occasion. I'm usually pretty good about pointing out when a particular verse is being used stupidly. Sam Harris does it all the time with the Bible says pi equals 3 when it doesn't. It doesn't even say anything remotely like that. What happens is you have people who read this with no real understanding of what the broader context was, and they use it in a way that's potentially unfair, and that would probably qualify as quote mining. More accurately, I don't know that it qualifies as quote mining, but for the purposes of this, we'll say it does. Okay, the problem is that there are other passages that are clear and obvious, and Christians will say that and other theists will say that you're taking this out of context. And then when you open it up and say, no, here's all of the context, they'll say, no, that's the context in that book, but you have to look at this through the lens of the entire Bible. First of all, no, you don't.
And I've gotten that with the fall. The New Testament is the context of the fall of man story. They're like, oh, that was written thousands of years later.
I tend to agree, actually. And your other point of Christians probably quote mine or misquote the context from the Bible, I think was actually very insightful and very useful as well. That's something that I took away from that episode anyway.
Yeah, not every problem that somebody lists, like you go on a website to search for contradictions in the Bible or whatever, Skeptics Annotated Bible or a list, whatever, you're going to find all kinds of them, and some of them are really crappy. Some of them are silly. Some of them are stupid. The example that I used go ahead.
Shallow, yeah. Many of them are shallow, but and unfortunately they don't point out the sort of big deeper ones that are sort of much more troubling sometimes, right? So yeah, you have to pick your battles, I guess, is maybe the answer.
Sorry, Matt, was there something else you were saying there? I don't know.
Sorry.
No, it was the example that I probably already gave on nonprofits, so I won't bother going through it again. Or maybe even
actually,
an email to you.
Could I ask you to do that? Because unfortunately, when I was listening to the nonprofits episode, it did cut out, and that was just my internet connection.
Or it might
if there is an example that you want to give, I'd be happy to hear it.
It might have been in an email to you that the response about people with a red letter Bible will read that passage where Jesus says, bring my enemies before me and kill them. And they'll say, look, this is Jesus calling for that. And that's an absolutely stupid way of presenting that. And any Christian worth a damn is going to point out that he's speaking in parable. However, anybody who's bothered to actually study this in context is going to understand that, yes, he's speaking in a parable, but God is represented by the king, the person. So it's kind of him speaking in parable about God wanting to have his enemies brought before him and killed. So
testifying to the character of God.
It actually is a fair objection. But you have people who haven't bothered to read the Bible or anything else that run across it. Some Yahoo on some, the Bible Sucks website has posted it on its own. Some atheist goes off and goes to a Christian and says, look, Jesus says this. And the guy says, oh, see, this is the problem. You didn't bother to study it in context. You just took it. And Jesus is given a parable here. And they'll ignore that point and talk about other points within the parable with regard to, rewards in heaven, etc. And so then this person who thought they knew what they were talking about got their pee-pee stepped on, and now all of a sudden they've had to review what they think about it, and maybe that is a good passage. Maybe those atheists who are pointing out problems in the Bible are just taking things out of context and being nitpicky. And their entire position, which is based on no critical thought and no attempt to investigate this, has now been flip-flopped. They have bought and purchased and built a house on sand. And if they'd have taken one more step, they'd have seen it. But yeah, that's probably the best example. Anyway, there's
Guys,
a bunch
I think
of
I'm
other
going to have to
calls.
let you go because you have other callers. I've got dozens more things I'd love to talk about, but thanks for covering those with me now.
Sure.
Great fan of the show, so thanks again for doing this.
Thanks,
you.
Mike. Send me an email.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
So, I turned off my mic. So, as a reminder, in addition to all the other things we do, including Atheist Happy Hour on Thursdays, after this show's over, we get together and go to dinner. Right now, we're going to Pluckers at Lakeline. The show's on for another 20 minutes, actually.
If you're in the Austin area, come and join us. Come and have dinner with us.
You can just Google Pluckers Lakeline, and you'll find it.
We'll be
But
there
it's
about,
right-
what, 6:30, 6:15?
Yeah, 6:30 or so. That place is normally packed. It's Sundays. Football season's opening up. We probably won't be going there for much longer. And I'm actually not quite sure whether or not I'll make it today. Probably, but maybe not.
I'll be there.
There's a car thing. Don will be there. The other guys be.
So George from New York just had a quick comment to this last caller, Mike, about the flat earth. Infidel.com/heaven_sky.htm. Frank's
Okay.
Frank's posting something on the screen that I don't know, but it came from George, and it's specifically related to Mike's call. So if you're able to see the text, I'm not. You'll know.
Okay.
But it's something at infidels.org. So
Sending
I will.
secret messages to our audience.
I will tentatively sanction it because I'm pretty safe about sanctioning anything from infidels. But next,
Liam from Halifax, Canada.
okay, is he on?
I'm calling him right
Oh, he's calling now.
Okay.
We're calling Liam in Halifax. Liam, answer your Skype. Are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a 14-year-old atheist from Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada.
Welcome.
I've been to
I became,
Halifax.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when I was in the Navy, we stopped there. But anyway, go ahead. Doesn't matter.
I called about I saw an episode 605, I believe. Euthyphro's dilemma. One of the guys brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, you guys brought it up. And I just wanted to I thought, I was gonna point out that in the idea, the Euthyphro's. I'm not a very good speaker.
It's okay.
Take your time. You're doing fine.
Okay. The Euthyphro's dilemma thing. The idea of a perfect God can also be applied to the idea of Euthyphro's dilemma, where if God created his own standard for being good, then if he's perfect by his own standard, why does that even matter? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I can be perfect by my own standard. Fortunately, though, I'm not even perfect by my own standards, which I think makes me more estimable than the deity who claims he is perfect by his own standards. But I think it's a good point. I'm not quite sure how it relates to Euthyphro, but it's still a good point to make, this idea of self-proclaimed perfection.
Or God is his own measure of
Yeah.
Or God is the ultimate measure of something, right?
My penis is the longest one that I have. That type of thing. I mean, yeah, it is. It's kind of tautological, I guess. And that last bit was a little titillating.
It's a titillating tautological. Okay.
Anyway.
Anything else, Liam?
No, thanks.
Okay. Thanks
Thank
a lot
you
for
for calling.
calling.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Who's next? As I just say the dumbest shit that happens to pop into my head at any given moment. It's a good example.
No, I love it when young people
I know you
call
love
in.
it. Oh,
And
that's
they
not
have
what you were
good
talking
stuff
about.
to say.
Craig from California.
Craig from California, we're calling you now. Craig has a quick comment. He wants to be a weekly segment on his own to make a quick comment and move along.
Okay.
Craig, are you there?
Who's next? As I just say the dumbest shit that
Okay, you're
Craig,
going to have
you
to
gotta
turn
shut
that off.
Listen to your phone and mute your stream, please.
Are you there? Hello?
I'm here.
Okay, go.
Oh,
Craig?
yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
What's your question?
Okay, here's the thing. While you're getting your stuff sorted, to everybody else, when you call in, turn off boy.
Weekly, just like monthly would be enough. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So you hear me?
I don't listen to the damn stream.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to Skype.
Yeah, I'm just paying attention to Skype. Okay. Well, another example of religion being less moral than most people would like to believe. About 8 years ago, 19 religious nuts decided it'd be a good idea to kill the 3,000 people. I personally disagree with that. Indeed, to me, it sounds like they're as crazy as those birthers out there. But, well, religion says it was a good thing. That's another example of religion being less moral than atheism. Thank you.
Okay. Good point.
Okay, thanks. Next.
So I guess he was talking about 9/11 when we just had an anniversary not too long ago.
Matt from New Hampshire.
Ah,
Matt from New Hampshire is our next caller.
we're calling you, Matt. When you get on, ignore the stream. Pay attention to Skype.
Okay, we're connected. Matt, are you there?
Yes, I am. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I just have a quick question about actually Matthew 6:1-6. Matt, you know the passage I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes, I believe so.
That starts in chapter 5. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I can read it for you. I have the King James version. I also have the ASV version right here. So the rest of the callers can be in the loop if you want.
Okay. I'll pull one up and you go ahead.
All right, I'll read the King James version. Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou dost thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. And this is the interesting part. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you that they have their reward. But when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. Those last two verses, I am interpreting it as it meaning don't pray out in the open, don't pray out in public, just pray by yourself in your room. However, I read these 6 verses to my Catholic friend, very best friend, and he pointed out that they said in the 5th verse it says that they be seen of men, and he said that means that it's don't pray out in the open just to pray out in the open so others can see you. It's okay to pray out in the open, but don't pray out in the open just so that others see you praying out in the open. What do you think?
So you still got your Bible open?
I'm on Bible Gateway, but
Okay. Well, go back a chapter to Matthew 5 and look at verse 16.
What do we got? Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven.
So in chapter 5, he wants you to do things publicly so your good works can be seen before men. And in chapter 6, he doesn't.
Wow, that's goodness gracious. That is only 22 or 32 verses later.
Yeah, roughly. Actually, Sermon on the Mount's one of the ones where I've done an entire freaking little moth. Come here. And yeah, he's been in here. They come in the bird food. Anyway, Sermon on the Mount's one of the ones where I've done an entire verse by verse, pretty much deconstruction, because this, no matter what, you can find the most or many of the most liberal, moderate, non-literalist Christians, and they will cite the Sermon on the Mount as the most beautiful and poignant thing anybody's ever said. It doesn't matter if they think that Jesus was divine or just a holy man or just a wise man or whatever. They still think that it's one of the greatest things ever written. I couldn't possibly disagree more, and so I went verse by verse through there, pointing out what was said that was good, what was said that was bad, what was said that was stupid and bad advice, what was said that was clearly contradictory or potentially contradictory. If you go to wiki.ironchariots.org, that's the counter-apologetics wiki that Russell and I run, and do a search for Sermon on the Mount, you'll find that. Everything in there. As a matter of fact, that's what I opened up. For Matthew 6, 1 through 4, I note, my first note is compare this to Matthew 5:16. He just told people to do their good works where they can be seen, and now he's contradicting that. Some apologists have claimed that this verse is about donating to charity, and the other verses cover other good deeds. That seems to be a simple wordplay to avoid the obvious contradiction. In any case, any being that might qualify as a god would surely have avoided any ambiguity that would lead to confusion, an observation that seems to apply to the bulk of the Bible and not simply this sermon. Interestingly, there's more where I discuss this thing about rewards and stuff. What I found kind of cool was the passages you were focused on, 5 and 6, about praying in private. It's 7 and 8 that strike me as the most amusing, because 7 says, "But when you pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking." And yet, if you go into any church, all you hear is vain repetitions. Oh yeah, occasionally somebody interrupts with some original prayer, but "Our Father who art, Dominus Patris."
Vain repetitions.
Ask your Catholic friend why praying a rosary doesn't qualify as repetition in verse 7, and he'll probably just say, "Because I'm doing it by myself and not in front of people." But
then the next one.
So yeah, it's verse 8, just basically saying, "Don't be like these people." By the way, the particular irony here is that verse 7 has this "don't pray repetitious prayers," and in verse 9 is when Jesus teaches them the repetitious prayer that they all repeat over and over: "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." I mean, you couldn't write a more stupidly ironic speech if you wanted to. But yeah. So it said, if you're gonna look through Sermon on the Mount, not to be entirely self-promotional, but I did put a bunch of work into it.
You even got a pretty picture.
Oh yeah, there's a pretty picture.
Okay.
There's step-by-step stuff. There's talk about. There's basically detailed commentary for all of them. We got like 5 minutes, so I appreciate it, Matt, but we got to let you go.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your call.
Bye-bye.
So yeah, at least my work isn't going wasted.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah, I find that when you write something publicly, you often get the opportunity to refer back to it or point people to it, and sometimes it.
By the way,
I wrote an atheist Christmas letter that comes back and wakes up every year around that time, and people seem to enjoy it, so that's good.
Also at the Iron Chariots wiki, Russell's gone through some chick tracks, including Big Daddy.
Oh,
that's loads of fun.
Oh, those are fun.
And I've got a minute-by-minute breakdown of a couple episodes from Ray Comfort's Way of the Master series, including The Beauty of a Broken Spirit, Atheism.
Did you do the banana one?
That is the bananas in there. It's probably about 50 pages long, but who's next?
Sean in Chicago.
Sean in Chicago. You may or may not be the last caller, because we only got like
3 to 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes. What do you got? Oh, Sean, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, what you got?
All right, guys. Actually, good that you were talking about Ray Comfort, because that's actually what I wanted to talk about. One of the things, Ray Comfort, his blog posted on September 3rd that he was starting a daily blog talk radio program, and he wanted to consider having a Atheist Friday and have atheists call in and chat. And I asked you the last time I called in, I'm Maverick 713, if you would, I was saying it would be a good idea if you were to debate Ray Comfort, and you said, well, no, because taking him seriously would kind of put his pedestal up a little bit higher when it really shouldn't be. And I agree with you on that part, but the reason I think that you should debate him or call into his radio show or try to have something is because now that we're in the age of information, I know there's people who are already lost to the idea, but there's still, like you said, fence sitters and stuff like that. So if, you're one of the better debaters, like, you guys were talking about the Thunderfoot thing too, and you guys were talking about how you thought it was a bad idea. And I had mixed feelings about it, but when I saw it, I thought it was horrible because Ray turned around and used that video footage that he had with Thunderfoot, because it was made in his studio and he owned the rights to it, and Thunderfoot had his own camera too, but Ray turned around and made videos and actually sold those videos, so he made money off of that. And I know that if he was to debate somebody as skilled at it as you are, because you don't let people run away when they try to do the goalposts moving and stuff like that, you actually follow them through the whole maze, and when they usually have gotten most people lost, just people like you and others who will say, well, no, I'm still here. I followed every point that you had, and you're not going to lose me. Because I know deflecting is one of the big things they do.
I'll say this because we've only got 2 minutes left. The only way Ray's going to make money off a debate with me is if he cuts my part out entirely.
Right. I understand.
But I've gone back and forth on this. Martin thinks, and has posted it at the blog, that we should ignore Ray, that Ray's only popular because of atheists, and that's mostly true.
Right.
I think it's too late for that, and that's why I don't. But I'm going back and forth on how much attention needs to be made or in what ways. I'm not opposed to.
A lot of people use his. You hear the stuff like Venom Fang X was one of the bigger ones. He had a huge audience
until his parents shut him down.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, he had a huge audience.
Yeah.
And one other thing, you guys can keep commenting on that. I'm gonna get off right now. But there's a Charles Darwin movie that just came out recently.
Yeah, it won't be coming out.
It's called Creation, starring Paul Bettany, and it's not getting any airtime in America because it's talking about the struggle that he had with Christianity after his 10-year-old daughter died.
To be fair, doesn't have American distributor. Now, why it doesn't have an American distributor may not be because of the religious contention. I mean, you've got films like Dogma and Religious and other things. It may just be that it's not a movie they think they're going to be able to make any money off of here, not necessarily anything conspiratorial. We only got like 30 seconds left. I apologize, but we got to let you go. To all you people who are waiting, we do try and keep a list. Get on early. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Joe. And Frank for being here. We'll be back again next week as Frank does everything he needs to do up there. And we're heading over to Pluckers. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
See you.